Welcome back to the lecture of Introduction to Environmental Economics. In this part, our learning objectives are to understand the difference between positive and normative analysis, to comprehend the implications of positive and normative analysis, and to understand the mechanism of climate change, to know the consequence of global warming, and finally to understand positive analysis of climate change as together. Now, to initiate the topic of positive and normative analysis, it's very important to understand from the economics discipline that how do we comprehend the perspective of positive and normative when we talk about economic analysis. Positive economics merely describes the world around us, while normative economic analysis tells us what should be done for any problem. Economic analysis that is meant to identify what policies should be pursued in terms of when that particular question of policies and which policy will be the best policy, that is termed as normative analysis. Normative analysis can be very, very useful for the public policy. It answers the question like which policy will be the best for the society to solve a problem. However, normative analysis suffers from big shortcomings, such as it depends on a set of value judgments that most likely will not be embraced by everyone. So basically, normative is telling us the ethical value judgment, which may or may not be accepted by the society, but it is the fundamental of economics and a solution. On the other hand, positive analysis of economics, it analyzes the objectively whatever problem is observed. It quantifies and characterizes the behavior of the world around us. So, positive analysis, on the other hand, is just observational. Positive analysis typically confines itself to describing the world around us, and it is as it is. It does not make any judgment. It simply says that the world as it is, and not as what it should be. Positive analysis can provide a significant contribution to the public policy formulation, as it tells us the observation and the present situation, the current world, how the problem is situated. The policy makers can learn from the positive analysis also of how other polluters have behaved in the context of the problem and in a similar permit system. So when it comes to environmental economics, both positive and normative analysis are important and critical for the policy formulation. The positive analysis of environment economics will tell us the system of permit system, evaluate and examine the permit system of the people or and the states, or you can say the regions or the countries who have adopted the system. So there's lot of learning component involved in this. Now, one should understand when we talk about positive analysis of climate change, one should know what climate change is and where it is placed as. Climate as a definition, it differs definitely from the weather. Weather is simply what we experience in terms of temperature, precipitation, wind, or similar atmospheric processes. These experiences change over a minute-to-minute basis. They may change from day-to-day basis or even month-to-month basis. Weather fluctuates widely over a year. However, the climate is different from weather. Climate is the average weather, roughly the average temperature over a year or annual rainfall, etc. Rainfall, temperature, humidity, these are all parameters of measuring the change. It is simply a distribution of the weather over a long period of time. We do not observe climate, we observe weather, and from that we infer climate. We observe 30 years of the temperature of a city or a place and calculate the average. This average characterizes the climate of the city or the place. However, this average temperature is only one type of a climate change. When we are looking at one aspect of the climate, that is temperature, we will assess climate only through a temperature, and that becomes the climate change. But if we want to see other aspects like precipitation, wind cycle, and all that, so we need to observe different components and aspects of climate to categorize or to conclude climate change. Now, what is the mechanism of climate change? The basic mechanism of climate change is the emission of greenhouse gases, which are also called as GHGs, such as carbon dioxide, which is a major substantial GHG, carbon dioxide. Such greenhouse gas GHGs tend to make the atmosphere somewhat opaque to outgoing infrared radiation, so given off by the warmed surface. So it creates a belt around us, and that infrared radiation gets trapped. Greenhouse gases, they make the atmosphere somewhat opaque, and this tips the balance towards the warmer earth. Primary greenhouse gas, which is carbon dioxide, is emitted in vast quantities in the world today, largely emitted from the combustion of fossil fuels. As we all know it, they become the major source of GHGs and carbon dioxide emissions. In 2009, nearly 30 billion tons of per year of carbon dioxide were injected in the world's atmosphere. This has been going on since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Carbon dioxide, once emitted, it stays in the atmosphere for a long period of time. A ton emitted today will take decades to leave the atmosphere. So it's a major concern of environmental issue. The concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has increased from the natural background of approximately 280 parts per million, that is ppm, at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution 1750 to about 280 ppm today. So mechanism, in 2007, IPCC, that is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, estimates that the global average temperature has already risen by about 3/4 of the degree Celsius over the period, and we most likely to rise additional 1 to 3 degree Celsius at the end of the century. So what has been the consequences of global warming? We all know it is rising temperature that can lead to all sorts of negative and positive consequences. Rising temperature has been badly hit now in the current years of June 2020, 22, 21, and we have seen the sea level rise, more frequent heat waves. That is also all the parts of the world are facing, increased insect-borne diseases, changes in the agriculture productivity, all this what we have been observing. Climate change stands in the list of major social problem and economic problem as well facing the world. Some of the people feel that this is a low or medium priority issue. Others feel that it is a very important and priority based issue. One of the positive question associated, now as an economic planner or economist, one needs to assess climate change and understand the both positive and normative aspects of climate change. One of the positive questions associated with climate change is how different economic sectors they respond to different climates and weather deviations in the past, how they have responded earlier, and based on that, how are they going to respond in future. Now, to look at different sectors which have been affected by climate change, one of the very important sector which comes to our mind is the agriculture sector. Specifically, agriculture sector is how it gets directly affected by the climate. In different levels of agriculture crop, the levels of cropping and growing of agriculture products in different regions all depends upon the climatic conditions in that region, and therefore the productivity as well as the agriculture profits, they are directly linked with the climate of that area within that geographical region. Such as if we pick up United States, then within United States different areas having different type of climate will be compatible for different type of variety of crop. Mendelssohn was an environmental economist in 1994 at Yale University, set out to measure the effect of climate change on agriculture in United States altogether. So different climates in different parts of United States exist. Consequently, it should be very evident that it is possible to measure the effect of different climates on agriculture productivity and finally agriculture profit, because one can see differences in the productivity based upon the climatic condition, and one can observe, examine and have an empirical analysis based on that. Assuming nothing else changes, that is very important assumption that economists take. Assuming everything else remains same, it is easy to estimate how climate change would affect agriculture. For instance, consider a plot of land in Minnesota and nearly identical plot in some other region, maybe Iowa or other state. The only difference in these two regions is basically we assume that there is an average annual temperature of a plot in Iowa is considered as on an average 2 degrees Celsius warmer than the Minnesota plot. So two different regions having a temperature difference, average temperature difference of 2 degrees. So let us see what happens to their productivity and land as well as the agriculture profits. One can easily infer that the difference in the return of agriculture in the two locations is attributable to the difference in the climate. It is very interesting to observe that how the difference in two regions having a different climate will impact their agriculture profits as well as it will have an impact on the economy. The differences in the profitability between the two locations should be entirely capitalized in the value of the land now. Okay, so very interestingly, this difference due to climate and this difference in the agriculture productivity and profits can be directly linked to the value of the land, and how one can see interestingly how this connection and interlinkage has been transmitted and trickled down to the economic aspect of value of land, which is one of the important factors of production. If Iowa plot is more profitable, suppose, then the land there should be worth more. So the difference in the land value between the two locations should fully capture the difference in the attainable stream of profits in the two locations. In 1994, Mendelssohn and the team, they exploited the logic by comparing the agriculture profitability in the number of different locations with different climatic conditions over whole of United States. So it was a wonderful, interesting and pilot research done at that time, and by statistically measuring the effect of climate on agricultural land values, it is plausible to infer the value of climate as a capitalized in the land value. So basically, one can see that land value can be taken as a proxy, or as a proxy or a shadow price in terms of for the climate value of the climate. Thus, it is possible now to estimate how the land values and thus agriculture profits will change if the climate changes. Okay, so this is the case when you have observed, and it is a positive analysis, and when you are observing and analyzing what it is as it is. You are not prescribing any normative instruction or norm or any kind of ethical judgment what should be, but it is basically you are observing objectively and specifying the results. So this method is called as Ricardian approach, and this is named after David Ricardo, because the price of land has been capitalized on the as a beneficial climate, and different climates result in different land values. It is observed that each activity, such as growing corn, does well in some climate regimes and it does very poorly in the other climate regimes, basically in other climatic conditions. So one should also take care about the type of crop that can be grown under different climatic conditions across regions. So if the climate itself changes across time, one can relate and take the same situation in the intertemporal analysis. This was spatial analysis when you're talking about different space or different regions, but same thing can be applied in the intertemporal analysis, talking about the type of crop that will suffer from the profitability. Loss of profitability is something which we can infer because of climatic changes in the climate or change in climatic conditions. As you can see in this graph, we have seen that on the x-axis, different climate conditions are there, and it becomes, as you move from the origin to right hand side, movement on the x-axis, we have plotted the climate, and in the x-axis, when you move from left to right, you are depicting a warmer and warmer climate. It means your temperature is rising. On the other hand, in the vertical axis, we are depicting the value of land. So one can see the first graph, that is the first curve, which has wheat as on the top, which means that when the climatic conditions or the temperatures are low enough, at this the profitability of the land because of wheat production is quite high. And as temperature starts increasing because of climate change, of course, then the value starts declining and it becomes no more profitable to produce wheat. And once there's another intersection of the corn, and one can see that to switching over the corn from point A to D will become more profitable, and if you have to change the crop, you change the crop in order to preserve your profits. Similarly, you move on to the other graph and like that. So the graph clearly depicts that as temperature change happens, or you can say climate change occurs, the profitability, the crop productivity of land, the land value and profitability of agriculture crop, that also gets affected. So this crop switching is something which is just very, very evident from the graph. If the climate changes and land use remains the same, then the consequences may be very, very significant. On the other hand, if the land use changes, implying adaptation. This is basically the notion of adaptation that is being put forward in this discussion or in this analysis, that you adapt towards the climate change by changing your agriculture patterns. The consequences may be much less. The impact borne by the change in the climate on the loss of monetary income or the profitability of agriculture sector, that is mitigated, and mainly because by adaptation. And this is evident from the figure which we just saw. We start from point B with the wheat and profits are very, very high. And thus, suppose the climate warms or dries out and then we moving towards point F, there would appear to be significant drop in the value of wheat farming. So what we have done is that farmer switches to corn. Profits will only drop to point D. Instead of dropping more, they'll drop to point D, which is only slightly less than the profitable than B. It is the upper envelope. So what we are basically, if we move on to the same graph, what we are looking up is the envelope of the dark area which has been shaded in the graph. So it is the envelope that which we are looking at to understand the essence of this analysis. It is the upper envelope of the curves in the figure that will determine how climate affects the value of activity on land, taking account the adaptation that is inevitable and it should occur in order to combat climate change. Adaptation of crop change or agriculture in the agriculture sector. Finally, the value of agriculture land was estimated using this particular method only, and it was approximately estimated 3,000 countries in it was estimated for 3,000 countries in United States. It was also concluded that land values depend on the factors that determine agriculture productivity. Those factors are climate, soil quality, altitude, slope, latitude, and tendency of having floods. Now, this is the model which is there on the screen, that why final factor which are contributing to the land values on the left hand side, dependent variable, that can be predicted or that can be estimated by this regression equation, the model, where xi are various factors such as agriculture productivity, climate, long run average weather, then soil quality, then altitude, slope, latitude. All these factors, when you bring them together, they will determine the land cost. So now we would like to, this is all about the positive analysis of climate change, which is very, very important and significant if some of you are interested in the research for climate change in terms of environmental economics. So this kind of analysis in the agriculture sector, impact analysis on agriculture sector due to climate change, will be very useful contribution in the regime of environmental economics. So then in this lecture we deliberated on the positive and normative analysis of economics. Then we also describing the differentiation between the two of positive and normative analysis. Then describing the notion of climate change, the lecture also highlighted the difference between the climate and weather. Having discussed mechanism of climate change, consequences of climate change were summarized, and finally, in the context of climate change, the positive analysis of climate change was presented by this model, which was the case study in United States. Now, today's lecture was taken from the textbook of environmental economics, Charles Kolstad of 2011, Intermediate Environmental Economics. Hope you enjoyed the lecture. Thank you so much.